First story, told by Evan Mercer. I moved to Ashbrook, Pennsylvania, a small town where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. It was the kind of place where the sidewalks were mostly empty by 7 in the evening, and the most exciting event of the week might be the county fair or a kid losing his first tooth. I liked it because it felt safe, predictable, and most importantly, quiet. At least it used to. The spring of 2020 was supposed to be just another quiet season for me. Instead, it became the backdrop for one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I was in my mid-30s, recently single after a long-term relationship, and absolutely convinced that life had decided to teach me a lesson about solitude. The heartbreak was raw, the kind that eats at you slowly until you don't recognize the person staring back from the mirror. I had resigned myself to a routine of work, isolation, and the numb comfort of my TV. My bedroom was essentially a living room now, with a couch, a TV, and little else. It was where I slept, ate, and tried to forget that life existed outside my small corner of Ashbrook. It was a Saturday night. I was slouched on the couch halfway through a random horror movie I had picked purely because it required minimal effort. The screen flickered with cheap effects, the audio was muffled and inconsistent, but I didn't care. I just needed something to distract me from my own thoughts. I glanced at my phone. My mother had called 4 times that day. I ignored it each time. She meant well, but I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't want the questions about whether I'd eaten or gone outside or even just lived. About 20 minutes into the movie, I realized how bad it really was. Every spoken word seemed buried under a wall of static, and the sound effects would jump suddenly, loud enough to make me flinch. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was a single metallic clang that kept repeating, sharp, distinct, and completely out of place. At first, I assumed it was part of the film, a poorly timed sound effect. But as I listened, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't coming from the speakers. The sound had a resonance that suggested proximity, a hollow ring like metal striking concrete. And it wasn't on screen. The characters weren't holding anything that could make that sound, nor were they in a setting that justified it. I paused the movie, straining to listen. Clang. My heart stopped. That noise hadn't been part of the film. It had come from inside the house. I froze, gripping the edge of the couch. The dim glow from the TV illuminated the room just enough to see the outlines of furniture, but no one was there. My mind raced. Maybe it was a falling object or a vent or some old house quirk I hadn't noticed. But as I held my breath, hoping it was just imagination, the sound came again. Clang. I jumped up, flashlight in hand, and moved through the house. The kitchen, empty. The guest room, empty. Hallways, empty. Everything exactly as it should be. Then it came again. Clang, this time from upstairs. My bedroom. The room I'd been sitting in the entire time. I froze halfway up the staircase. Fear wrapped around me like ice, tightening with each breath. Slowly I ascended, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. As I neared the bedroom, I noticed the window slightly ajar, the one I'd left open for a spring breeze. Maybe it's outside, I thought. Maybe something fell. Maybe. I pulled the curtain aside and froze. A small figure stood in the middle of my backyard, a child no older than 8 or 9, clutching what looked like a PVC pipe. The faint moonlight outlined his small frame, his hoodie shadowing his face. He raised the pipe and struck one of the lawn chairs. Clang. My stomach sank. I stumbled back from the window, disbelief colliding with panic. What the hell was a kid doing outside at night making that noise? And why was he just standing there waiting? I debated my next move. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he wandered away from a neighbor's house. But then my instinct screamed at me something wasn't right. No child would stay there, just standing with a pipe for so long. I grabbed the kitchen knife and crept toward the back door. My hand hovered over the knob. What if it was more than a lost child? What if he wasn't alone? I peered through the small side window next to the door. That's when I saw them. 2 men dressed head to toe in black crouched near the deck stairs. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't hiding entirely. They were ready, waiting, watching. My mind raced. I didn't know whether to call the police immediately or try to get out. Fear made me hesitate, my fingers brushing the cold knob of the back door. I could see them clearly now. 2 adult men, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the yard, silent and menacing. My stomach knotted as realization sank in. The child outside wasn't just alone, he was bait. Clang, the boy struck the chair again. My body screamed to run, but my mind stayed locked in terror. Any sudden move might set off the men. My pulse roared in my ears. I had no choice. I needed a plan. I backed away from the door slowly and crept to a small window beside it, the blinds barely open. I needed to see them clearly without drawing attention. And that's when my heart nearly stopped. The child was still there, but the men were moving. One of them raised his head and locked eyes with mine through the glass. I yanked the blinds shut and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher answered calmly, but I could barely speak. I explained what I saw, trying not to scream. The boy, the men, the backyard. While I was on the line, a loud bang echoed from the back door. The men were attempting to force entry. I sprinted upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom, knife still clutched. My breathing was ragged. I could hear footsteps downstairs, then the sound of something heavy smashing against furniture. I counted my heartbeats, hoping the police would arrive in time. Seconds felt like hours. The bathroom doorknob turned slightly. I screamed, announcing loudly that the police were on the way. The intruders paused, then retreated. The sounds of movement downstairs faded into silence. The police arrived shortly after. No one was in the house anymore. No fingerprints, no surveillance cameras, nothing. The boy had vanished. The two men were gone. The officers listened, took notes, but said there wasn't much they could do without evidence. My heart didn't stop racing for weeks. I moved out of that house not long after, leaving Ashbrook behind. Even now I think about that night. The boy, the men, the clang. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't paused the movie or noticed the window. Some nights I can still hear that metallic clang echoing in my mind. Second story, told by Ryan Callahan. I never understood how people could survive a full week of spring break in Miami or some other crowded, sun-soaked tourist trap. The noise, the crowds, the relentless heat, it was too much. For me, spring break meant one thing: disappearing. Hiding out at my parents' house in Belmont, Pennsylvania. A town so small that you could drive from one edge to the other in less than 15 minutes. I didn't even need to leave the property if I didn't want to. Peace, silence, freedom from the chaos of college life. That particular Monday morning started like any other. I was up early, still carrying the tension of exams and assignments from the week before. 6 a.m. as usual, dressed in my gym clothes, heading out to the familiar streets of Belmont for a quick workout. The streets were quiet. A few joggers, a dog walker or two, and me, moving through the sleepy neighborhood as if nothing else existed in the world. It was predictable, safe. At least, that's what I thought. The first sign that something was off appeared about 15 minutes into my drive. Parked along the curb, half hidden in the shadows, was an ice cream truck. Engine off. Lights dark. Still as a corpse. The early hour didn't make sense. No kids outside, no traffic, nothing. Just the truck idling like a phantom from someone else's imagination. My stomach tightened, a low, insistent thrum of unease. I slowed down, squinting to see if anyone was inside. Nothing. Empty. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was abandoned, left there by a prankster. Maybe a local vendor had started early, though that seemed unlikely in mid-March. I shook it off and continued to the gym. By the time I returned home a couple of hours later, my unease had only grown. The truck was still there. But this time it had shifted slightly down the street. The driver's seat was now occupied by a man, and though I couldn't see his face clearly through the tinted window, I had the distinct sense that he had been watching me. My pulse quickened. A simple, irrational thought struck me like a hammer. He had followed me home. I parked in the driveway, pretending not to notice him. My parents were at work and the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I walked inside slowly, telling myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't. I wasn't imagining it. Hours passed and I tried to bury myself in homework and small tasks around the house, but the nagging feeling of being watched didn't leave. Every half hour I found myself peeking through the blinds at the street, and every time, the ice cream truck had moved a little, creeping along, always keeping my house in view. I could feel my chest tighten, my mind oscillating between disbelief and fear. Finally, curiosity overcame my restraint. I grabbed my brother's old binoculars from the closet and held them against my eyes. The man was there, sitting in the driver's seat. And he wasn't just staring at the house. He had a pair of binoculars himself. He looked back at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator amused by his prey. My blood ran cold. That's when I called the police. They said they'd send a patrol car to check the neighborhood, but Belmont is small. Patrols are infrequent. The dispatcher assured me they would keep an eye out, but I knew deep down that I was mostly on my own. By nightfall, I had tried to convince myself that the man had left. I went to sleep, only to be woken around 3 a.m. by a faint haunting sound. Music. The high-pitched, unmistakable jingle of an ice cream truck. My heart jumped into my throat. I reached for my phone and peered out the window. There he was. And flanking him, barely visible in the darkness, were two small figures. Children. My chest tightened so much it felt like I couldn't breathe. They didn't move. They stood like statues on either side of the man. I couldn't make out faces, but I could see their small frames, their tiny hands pressed at their sides. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake my parents, but I was frozen. The realization hit me like a blow. This wasn't random. This was intentional. The man was orchestrating something, and the children were part of it. My instinct screamed at me, "Do not leave the house." I called my father, who immediately came outside with a flashlight. By the time he reached the yard, the man and the children were gone. Police came again, taking notes, but they found nothing. Weeks passed, and eventually life resumed its dull rhythm. But the memory never left. I couldn't forget the way the man had stared at me through the binoculars, the eerie calm of the children standing at his sides, the silence that had followed the music. Then, news broke. Two missing 6-year-old twins from a neighboring town. My stomach twisted, my mind replaying the scene from that night over and over. Had I been a witness to the very first stage of their disappearance? Had those children been with him all along, or were they added later? I couldn't stop thinking about it. For months, I checked the street from the guest room window. Every time a vehicle approached, my heart leapt. Every unfamiliar sound became a potential threat. Belmont, which had once felt safe, became a place of shadows and suspicion. I was hyper-aware of every movement outside, every sound in the night. Weeks stretched into months, and slowly I started noticing patterns. The truck only appeared when I was home alone. The music seemed to follow a rhythm, a deliberate signal. The man never interacted with anyone else, never left the vehicle for longer than a few minutes. It was as though he had a schedule, a plan that revolved entirely around me. Sleep became impossible. I started leaving lights on in every room, even during the day, to feel less vulnerable. I would check locks multiple times before leaving the house. Every creak of wood, every rustle outside set my nerves on edge. Then one night, a new level of terror emerged. I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a book, when I heard the jingle again. Softer this time, like a whisper, coming from the front yard. I froze, heart hammering. Slowly, I approached the window, peeking out through the blinds. The man was there, standing in the yard, and this time he wasn't alone. Two small shadows flanked him. I could see them better now, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlight. The twins. My stomach sank. I realized with horrifying clarity that he had been using the truck to stalk, to monitor, to manipulate. And I had been unwittingly observing him for hours, a captive audience. I dialed 911 immediately. I couldn't wait. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but the wait was excruciating. I couldn't take my eyes off the yard. Every second felt like an eternity. The man turned his head slowly, and for a moment our eyes met. I felt his gaze like a physical weight pressing into me. Then, he and the children vanished. The police arrived quickly this time, combing the neighborhood, but there was no trace. No footprints, no tire marks beyond the normal, no truck. It was as if they had melted into the night. I stayed awake until dawn, my mind replaying every moment, every detail, every sound. I felt a mix of relief and dread, knowing they were still out there somewhere. And I had no idea what their next move would be. In the following weeks, I obsessively monitored the streets. I installed cameras, changed my routines, and kept a constant eye on the skies. The ice cream truck never returned, but the fear lingered. Every siren, every passing car, every distant jingle in my memory could have been him. The man watching, waiting. Months later, I graduated, moved into a different town, and tried to put the past behind me. But Belmont streets, that silent, empty town, have left a permanent mark on me. I know now that even in small towns, in quiet neighborhoods, darkness can exist, waiting in plain sight, hiding behind familiar shapes and sounds. I will never forget that ice cream truck. I will never forget the man and those two small figures at his sides. And I will never forget how helpless I felt, realizing that in a town where nothing ever happens, I had stumbled directly into something I was never meant to see. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the faint jingle of an ice cream truck, my pulse quickens. I know it's only my memory playing tricks, but the terror is as real as the first time I saw him, and part of me knows that somewhere out there he's still watching. Third story, told by Alex Monroe. I had always been the kind of person who answered every phone call, partly because of my job as a BMW sales associate, partly because I hated missing anything important. My life was already chaotic. Clients calling at odd hours, prospects following up relentlessly, and ignoring a call was never an option. But that night, something about the way the phone lit up in the darkness felt different. The clock read 10:13 p.m. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The unknown number blinked on my screen. Normally, I would have picked up without hesitation, but this time I hesitated. A subtle unease knotted in my stomach. My living room, usually comforting, felt cold and oppressive. I could feel the quiet pressing against me, almost tactile, making the hair on my arms rise. I let the phone ring out. The minutes felt longer than they actually were, like time itself had slowed. A few minutes later, the same number rang again. Something primal in me screamed to answer this one. I picked up. At first, there was nothing but static. Thick, uneven, crackling fuzz that made my ears ache. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice. My voice. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. I listened closely. There it was again, unmistakable. Me, talking to a client earlier that afternoon. Every word, every inflection identical. My voice captured, distorted slightly by the static, yet undeniably mine. I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the shock. This was impossible. No one had access to my phone conversations. No one. I thought of rational explanations. Maybe it was some weird automated spam call mimicking voices. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I had set up some recording accidentally, though that made no sense. My mind ran through scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. The calls weren't random. They were deliberate. Someone had been listening, recording, and was now using it to unsettle me. I hung up, trembling, my hands gripping the phone so tightly it left red marks on my palms. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could it be? Why me? What did they want? The static lingered in my ears long after the call ended. A low hum that I could almost feel vibrating in my skull. I turned the phone over in my hands, staring at the black screen, expecting it to light up again. It didn't. The silence afterward felt worse than the noise. I set the phone down on the coffee table and turned on the TV, just to have some background sound. Something normal, human. A late-night infomercial droned about cookware, but it barely registered. I couldn't shake the thought that someone, somewhere, had been close enough to record my conversation earlier that day. My office phone? My car's Bluetooth system? Or had someone been physically near me? A stranger pretending to browse cars while quietly recording. By midnight, I'd convinced myself it was probably a scam or a tech glitch. I turned the phone off and went to bed. The digital clock glowed faintly red in the dark, 12:47 a.m. Just as I began to drift off, a faint buzz broke through the silence. My phone, even though it was powered off, the vibration rolled across the nightstand. I sat up, heart pounding. It couldn't be ringing, it was dead. I reached for it slowly. The screen was dark, no light, no sign of activity. But the vibration continued, long and rhythmic like a heartbeat. I stared until it stopped. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, the world looked deceptively normal again. Birds chirped. The sky was clear. The unease that had twisted my gut the night before dulled into confusion. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, some auditory trick caused by exhaustion. I went to work, forced to smile, sold a car, and almost believed I was fine, until that evening when the same number called again. This time I didn't answer. I just sat there watching the phone vibrate across the kitchen counter, dread crawling through me like a slow poison. Something told me that picking up again would make it worse. When it finally stopped, I told myself that was the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the beginning. By the end of the first week, I wasn't the same person. Every ring, every vibration, every flicker of light from my phone sent adrenaline spiking through my body. It had gotten to the point where I could hear phantom rings when the phone wasn't even on. Sometimes I'd swear I felt it buzz in my pocket when it wasn't there at all. I started keeping a log. Every call, every time, every phrase that was repeated back to me. Maybe part of me thought that by cataloging it, I could find some pattern, some reason this was happening. But the pattern was obvious. They knew when I was alone, and they always called just before midnight. The house no longer felt like home. My small Mapleton neighborhood, once quiet and comforting, now looked sinister at night. Every dark window might have been someone watching. Every parked car might have been theirs. The air itself felt charged, humming faintly like electricity just before a lightning strike. I stopped inviting anyone over. When coworkers called, I ignored them. I barely ate. I'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, the phone placed in front of me, staring at it like a loaded weapon. My reflection in the black glass looked hollow, thinner somehow. It wasn't just the calls anymore. It was the silence between them. There's a kind of silence that feels heavy, intelligent, like it's waiting for you to make the first move. That's what my house became, a box of waiting. I could hear the pipes creak, the heater kick on, the floorboards settle, but all those small domestic sounds felt orchestrated, like someone was controlling the rhythm just to see how I'd react. I tried calling my parents, but every time the line dropped after a few seconds. I drove to the dealership one night at 2 a.m., thinking maybe I'd feel safer there. The security lights hummed overhead, flickering slightly. I sat at my desk and just stared out at the empty lot of gleaming cars, thinking about how fragile glass was, how thin the barriers were between inside and outside. When I went home that morning, the phone was waiting for me on the porch. It wasn't where I left it. Someone had set it on top of the welcome mat, perfectly centered, screen up. My stomach twisted into knots. I picked it up slowly, half expecting it to be warm from a stranger's hand. It was cold. Too cold, like it had been sitting outside all night. I turned it on. One missed call. No voicemail. That was the first time I truly broke down. I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and cried. Not out of sadness, but raw panic. Because I knew that this wasn't random. Whoever was doing this wasn't trying to steal from me or scam me. They were trying to break me. I started hearing my voice even when the phone wasn't ringing. From the other room, from the TV when it was off, from the vents. Little fragments, half sentences, whispers that almost made sense. I'd catch myself answering them without realizing. Neighbors started noticing something was wrong. Mrs. Langley from across the street asked if I was okay after she saw me standing outside barefoot one night, just staring down the street. I told her I was fine, but I could tell from her eyes she didn't believe me. Sleep deprivation, hunger, fear, they blur the edges of reality. I began to question everything. Was this really happening? Was it all in my head? I recorded myself at night to prove it was real, setting up my phone on the nightstand and hitting record. In the morning, I listened to the playback. At exactly 11:48 p.m., there was a faint sound like a phone vibrating. Then static. Then my voice whispered, "You're awake, aren't you?" I threw the phone across the room. That was when I stopped trying to understand. I realized this wasn't about reason anymore. This was about survival. After that recording, I knew I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed a bag and drove 30 miles north to Canton, booked a cheap motel off the highway, and decided I'd get a new phone number first thing in the morning. The thought of hearing that distorted echo of my own voice again made me sick. At the Verizon store, the clerk barely looked up from her computer. "New number, same plan?" "Yeah," I said. My hands were shaking slightly. "I've been getting weird calls," she smirked. "Spam bots. Happens all the time." If only it were that simple. She set me up with a new SIM, transferred my contacts, and told me the old number would deactivate within a few hours. I drove back to the motel feeling lighter, free almost. I turned off the lights, drew the blinds, and for the first time in days fell asleep without fear. That peace lasted exactly 2 nights. The call came on the third evening, just before 11. New number, new phone, same voice, static, then my voice from earlier that day. "Thanks for your time, Mr. Cleary. I'll follow up with the paperwork tomorrow." I nearly dropped the phone. The recording was perfect, clear, current, and somehow stolen from a private conversation that had happened only hours ago. Then something new. The static thinned out. Another voice, low, distorted, but unmistakably human, spoke over mine. 11, just that one word. Drawn out. Hollow. I stared at the screen, watching the seconds tick by on the call timer, but no sound followed. Just breathing, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Like the caller was savoring my fear. Then the line went dead. I couldn't stay calm. I tore the motel room apart, looking for bugs, hidden transmitters, cameras, anything. The clerk downstairs must have thought I was insane, pacing the hallway at midnight. I even considered driving to the police again. But what would I tell them? That a stranger had somehow cloned my voice across 2 phone numbers and knew exactly where I was staying? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the dark window. The next day, I left the motel and drove home. Maybe I thought facing it would stop it. Maybe part of me was tired of running. When I arrived, something about the house felt wrong. The curtains were drawn differently. The air smelled faintly of metal. The living room light was on even though I'd turned everything off before leaving. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I froze. Another call. Unknown number. The voice came immediately, crisp and close. You shouldn't have left. Then silence. That was the moment I knew the truth. This wasn't about technology. Whoever was doing this wasn't hacking into my phone. They were following me physically, watching, recording. They had been everywhere I went. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat in the living room, clutching a baseball bat, watching the shadows crawl across the walls as the hours passed. At 11:01 p.m. exactly. My phone vibrated one last time. I picked it up, my hand trembling. Static. Then softly, the same voice whispered, "We're here." I didn't make it to the door before the power went out. I don't remember exactly how long the lights were out. Seconds, minutes, but when they flickered back on, everything was silent. My phone was gone from my hand. I must have dropped it, though I didn't remember doing it. The only light now came from the kitchen window, the moon spilling a pale glow across the floor. I crouched low, baseball bat in hand, every muscle tensed. The air felt thick, electric. My breathing was shallow, ragged. Somewhere faintly I thought I heard the soft click of a door latch. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice cracked in the middle. No response. I moved through the house room by room, checking each corner, every closet, under every bed. Nothing. Yet the feeling didn't leave. The sensation of eyes on me, of something inside the walls, listening. Around midnight, I sat back down in the living room. The phone lay on the coffee table, screen up. It hadn't been there before. I didn't touch it. At exactly 11:11 p.m., the screen lit up again. No sound, no ring, just a faint glow and one line of text. 11 means the door. The screen went black. I stared at the front door, pulse hammering in my ears. It was locked, deadbolt still in place, chain secure. But a sound came from behind it, slow, deliberate tapping. Like fingernails on wood, tap, tap, tap. I gripped the bat tighter, whispering to myself not to open it. Not to move. I stood perfectly still for nearly 5 minutes before the sound stopped. The silence afterward was unbearable. When I finally built the courage to open the door, no one was there. The porch was empty except for a single item sitting neatly on the mat, a cheap prepaid phone still powered on, with one missed call, unknown number. I brought it inside and smashed it with the bat until it split open, battery rolling across the floor. That's when I saw the engraving scratched into the back of the casing, crudely carved with something sharp. You answer yourself. That was it. That was the breaking point. I realized this wasn't a game. They didn't just want me afraid. They wanted me to lose myself. Days blurred together after that. I stopped going to work. I disconnected every device in the house and eventually threw my old phone into the river just outside of town. The silence was both relief and torture. I couldn't stand quiet anymore because quiet meant I might hear that voice again. When the police did wellness checks, I lied. Told them I was fine, just burned out from work. I couldn't explain the truth without sounding insane. A man's voice that sounds exactly like mine calls me every night. They'd have me institutionalized. I kept the blinds closed, slept during the day, stayed awake at night. But the fatigue ate away at me until everything blurred. Sometimes I'd wake up and find my phone on the table, powered on. even though I was sure I hadn't bought another. Sometimes the call log would have missed numbers I didn't remember seeing. My own voice began to fade from me. When I spoke, I didn't trust it. It felt foreign, like something borrowed. One night, I played a voicemail I didn't remember recording. It was me, breathing heavily, whispering the word 11 over and over until it dissolved into static. I turned it off, fell to the floor, and screamed until my throat burned. After that, I sold the house. Left everything behind. I moved 3 states away, took a new name, and promised myself I'd never own another phone. For a while, it worked. The silence was clean again, until I heard my new neighbor across the hall answer her phone one night. The sound of her ringtone was faint through the wall, but underneath it I swore I heard static. It's been 3 years since Mapleton. I tell people I left because of a bad breakup or stress, whatever makes the story simple. The truth is harder to explain. You can't make people understand a kind of fear that doesn't leave bruises. I live now in a small apartment in Flagstaff, Arizona. No phone, no computer, no internet. I pay rent in cash. The world outside moves on without me, but I prefer it that way. Silence used to terrify me, but now it's the only thing that keeps me sane, and yet, sometimes late at night, when the wind hums through the vents or a car radio drifts faintly from the street below, I swear I hear it again. The static. The whispering rhythm that once filled my house, threading itself through every wall, every line, every heartbeat. I've come to realize something about fear. It's contagious. It changes the way you see the world, the way you hear your own thoughts. I can't prove what happened. Maybe it was someone with advanced tech. Maybe it was something else. Something that uses voices as vessels, repeating what we say until it owns us completely. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. There's no comfort in logic anymore, only awareness. Sometimes I dream of Mapleton, empty streets, the sound of phones ringing from darkened houses. When I wake up, I find myself whispering the word I swore I'd never say again. 11. And somewhere in the walls, faint and distant, something whispers it back.